Good afternoon. This is Katie Dunker, the statewide coordinator for the Colorado Master Gardener Program. I'm so pleased to see a great turnout. Hopefully people can hear me. Can you confirm that on the chat box? Or a thumbs up? All right, we got a thumbs up. Perfect. Thank you again for joining us. If you're just jumping on, I'd love to see who is joining us from across the state. So please use the chat box to chime in. If you're having a hard time hearing, you may need to actually use the call-in number. So you should be able to find the audio feature. Look under, I think under audio, you should be able to look up what the number is. Otherwise, you can privately message me through the chat box and I can send that to you. All right, and I will include that in the chat box because if you can't hear me, it's not going, this is no help. All right, so let me get started here. Again, welcome, and hopefully you know what you're joining us for today, High Altitude Vegetable Gardening with Darrin Parmenter. Really excited to discuss the end because it's that time of year when we have to start looking at the end of the season. So today's talk is all about learning tips and tricks to get successful harvests from your tomatoes and peppers in challenging high elevation growing conditions. And it looks like we have some people who are in mountain communities and higher elevation communities joining us, so this is perfect. I'm seeing people from across the state, including Gilpin, Eagle, Clear Creek, Jefferson, Larimer, and LaPlata. So let me introduce Darrin. Without further ado, Darrin Parmenter is the director and horticulturalist with Colorado State University Extension in LaPlata County. He is a Durango native, which, Darrin, I think that makes you a Durangutan, but I'm not sure if that's a derogatory term or endearing. In this case, I'm going to use it as an endearing term. And he moved back in 2007 to work with CSU in his home county. His interests lie in gardening, food production, farming, and local food awareness, as well as food insecurity issues. His favorite places to be are no surprise, at a school garden, walking a farm, or sitting at his desk giving talks to a computer screen, which is so timely because we're giving you that opportunity right now. And I have to just add a kind of a personal note. Back in 2012 or 2013, long before I was working for Colorado State University, I was an alum and received an email from the Alumni Association that there was going to be some webinars open to alumni, and one was on vegetable gardening. And Darrin was the speaker, and I joined in on that. And I recall his passion for veggies and talking about tomatoes as the prima donnas of the garden. And I have found that to be very true in my own gardening experience, which is why I don't even bother with tomatoes anymore, although I'm hoping to change that. So, all right, at the end of this talk, there will be an opportunity to give your feedback. So evaluations will be sent to local coordinators, will be posted on CMG Online, where this recording will be posted and found. And we'll also include it in the chat box. So with about 10 minutes to go in the talk today, I will post that in the chat box. You can click on it and give your feedback immediately. All right, I think that's all I have. So Darrin, I'm gonna pass it over to you and you can get started.
Cool. Just make sure you guys can hear me. Katie, you want to give me a thumbs up or something?
Got it.
Okay. Gotcha.
Marilyn is having a hard time.
So if I don't look like if it looks like I'm not staring at you, it's just because I'm staring at the other screen. So I appreciate the introduction and I appreciate the chance to be here. I noticed a couple people down here from my home county, so it's nice to see those folks here. And so, as Katie mentioned, there is the prima donna in the garden, it's the diva. She drives us crazy, but we tend to grow her, and we'd like to grow her not too distant cousin, the peppers. And that's kind of what we'll talk about today. If there's time at the end of the class, I'm happy to answer questions or, listen to feedback from everybody here as far as, other crops and hints, tricks, issues, questions, all those wonderful things. Because again, whenever I teach classes similar to this, either through Master Gardener program or just here locally, I feel like that feedback we get from participants is just as important as anything I tell you. I'm maybe an expert through CSU, but you all are most likely experts in your own garden. So that's Awesome. And so let's go ahead and begin. I want to make sure that all works well. Here. Okay. So if for some reason you guys don't see the basic screen, just let me know, because I can't see what you guys see. I just see my screen here. But what kind of, Colorado in general, Colorado is a challenging state. We all know that. If you live anywhere from Denver Metro up north to Fort Fun, down into Springs, Pueblo area, and then we hit the corners. You hit everything from southeast corner where it's pretty dry and hot, but really cold and windy in the wintertime.
Hey, Darrin,
Oh,
can you try sharing your screen again? It doesn't look like I'm seeing the PowerPoint.
oh, God. What do you guys see?
Just you.
Ah, okay. Um,
Yes,
we on
that's
now?
it. Yep.
Cool. All right, now you guys see it. See, this is what I told you to talk to me. Thank you. So yeah, we had this huge range, and then as we go west and we go north, we get higher in elevation, and growing vegetables gets more and more challenging, as we all know. So in general, the state, right? The general average elevation is about 6,800. But again, you're taking into account these, huge 14,000 foot peaks, so it kind of skews it to a certain degree. But again, we have kind of the banana belt of the Grand Junction area, which is about 4,500 feet in elevation, into Denver Metro, which is 5,280, and then down here in Durango, we're at 65. And then we just get higher in the mountain communities. I know we said some folks are, from Eagle County or from Summit, all those high elevation resort towns, Aspen close to 8, Telluride's at 87, and then I think one of our highest cities or towns, Leadville. It's up there with Alma, up and over 10,000 feet. So, which is crazy to have towns and people who are able to live over 10,000 feet. Big props to you. So, with elevation challenges also comes the challenges of our growing season. And I know if you're an extension agent on this call, you are bound to get the question, email, phone call, inquiry at the farmer's market booth. When is our first frost or when is our last frost? And I really have no idea, even here in LaPlata County, just because of all the different variables that factor into growing season, which I'll get to here in a couple of slides. But, I wish I could tell you we have rough numbers, but what I'm telling people now, and I think that maybe it's more of a reflection of our climate in general, is that abnormal is the new normal. That's how I kind of view it. Because we can have super, degrees in variability from one year to the next, one decade to the next, whatever it is. But again, with that, as we say, Grand Junction being that kind of the banana belt, you get 175-ish days there, which to me would be amazing. You all in the Denver metro area, and then down into Pueblo, you're 150 days-ish. But again, based off of some of your microclimates, if you're urban, if you're on the outskirts, you may kind of give or take 5, 10, 15 days in there somewhere. And then just, again, based off of some data that CSU has collected over the years, these are rough numbers. It's kind of a 50% chance that your last frost or your first frost, if you're located in these areas, is going to fall in the state. And I'm sure some of you, and maybe Eagle saying, yeah, I wish June 12th, we're getting freezes way late into the year. And I get that for sure. Every year is incredibly variable. But what I think this will reflect is that season length is limited. So when we factor in growing tomatoes, peppers, the warm season crops, into a season that's 60 days like you have up in Gunny or in Steamboat, you're going to have some challenges and you're going to have to do some modifications. Here in Durango, we have, I think I maybe had a slide, we have about 128 days, but there's also huge degrees in variability there. So if we look at those components of our system, again, frost-free days, what we just spoke about, that's a huge factor, obviously, into what we can grow. Those weather extremes, and that kind of pulls into the cold nights factor. And that's the bummer. And I think people need to recognize that more than just the coldest temperature is just how cold our nights get. We can have anywhere in our mountain communities, it is not uncommon to have 40 degrees plus swings in temperature from day to night. Come early June, typically here in LaPlata County, we'll get highs in the low 90s and then lows in the mid to upper 40s sometimes. So you get these big swings, and I'm telling you, most of our warm season crops don't like those big swings in temperature. They don't like it really hot in the day, and they really don't like it really cold at night. In an ideal world, they would be 80s during the day and upper 60s, 70s at night. And maybe some places in the Denver metro where you get these heat sinks, but I know we don't get that here. It's going to be at least a 20-degree temperature change every day. And some of our crops really don't like that. They also don't like that intense sunlight. So we put out a pepper plant. It takes forever to get going. It kind of puts on some leaves, and then, end of June, 1st of July, middle of July, in some places it'll start to fruit, but there's not a whole lot of leaf material there. And not having that leaf material there to protect those fruit from this intense sun, especially at elevation, then you're putting another challenge of sun scald and fruit scald, and you get poor quality fruit in that case. Susceptible to drought. And it's funny, like most of the state, we were in severe drought 2017, 2018. We culminated with the crazy fires down here, the 416 fire down here in the summer of 2018. And we just saw significant drought. We saw lakes, reservoirs being shut off, ditches, no more water coming through in the 1st of August. So some folks got no water the entire season. So when you get all of that, growing an annual crop like vegetables as fast as we can, those two don't really work very well together. And then we can kind of hop forward to 2018, 19, the winter, and then into the summer now. We had a crazy winter, just a ton of snow. Reminiscent of when I grew up here in the 70s. That was a typical winter, and we don't see those anymore. So when they come around and we have 300% of essentially water equivalent in the mountains, you are then flush with water. And so now we're flushed with water, but, come moisture and water will come disease and insects and plagues of the world, it seems like, down here. So it's, again, like my grandma always said, I'm not going to swear on this, but my grandma swore, if it's not your blank, it's your elbow. And so that's kind of where we are at. We've gone from severe drought into a lot of moisture, and we always are going to have a challenge. And the last one I want to talk about real quick is just microclimate. And I know we're going to be here talking about what to do now with our tomatoes and peppers, and I promise I'll get there. But all of these other processes and components lead into that. So there's also microclimate. My yard where I'm at, I'm down here in downtown, roughly the middle of Durango. I kind of sit up on a little bit of a hillside, and I know a person on this phone call on the Zoom, Marilyn, she's, as far as a crow flies, a couple 100 meters from my house, but I would bet my climate and my microclimate is different than Maryland's. I can tell you that one of my good friend gardens about a quarter of a mile to the north of me, same neighborhood, same house and everything, but she's in this sink where she gets cold air blowing through her property at night. And so she is consistently freezes out, I would say maybe a week to 10 days before I would freeze out. So again, this microclimate plays such a huge role, especially with vegetable production, because vegetables are so sensitive to light, to heat, to wind, to cold, to every single thing that Mother Nature throws at us. So this is Durango, and this is roughly the last 10 years of a weather station that's in downtown Durango. And this is kind of how I go back, and I'm not going through each year here. of abnormal being the new normal, right? So it's kind of just all over the board from, back 10 years ago, our last frost was the 1st of May. But then we went all the way till, into September. But I can tell you the month of May in 2019, while we may not have had a freeze, it was cold. It was overcast. It was pretty rainy. And so when you get those situations, you're not going to have a ton of growth in your plant anyway. So I could put a tomato out on May 1st and it would never freeze, but it probably would also never grow. So take these numbers, with a grain of salt here. Then we're going to hop forward to 2019. So again, we were all stoked to roll into 2019. We have all this moisture. It's been fantastic. And I'm not expecting you to completely, be able to read this. Let's see if I can. I'm probably going to screw everything up, but I'm going to try to get a mouse. Oh, no, I have no idea how to get my mouse. Maybe you can see my mouse. I have no clue. But you're going to see like this point of where, the upper left graph is May, the lower right graph is June of 2019. So in 2000 and this is, all right, we're going to try this. This is our highs for the month of May, and this is our lows, where the consistent smaller line would be the average, and then the thicker line is the actual, same for the cold. So as you can see, in the month of May, we're a little bit above, way below, a little bit above, and then middle of May on, we were pretty far below normal. Our cold temperatures kind of hung around that same time period, and I'm not planting tomatoes and peppers in May. Some people are. I would highly recommend using some sort of frost protection, walls of water, frost cloth, whatever you can do for that month of May, but I'm not going to risk it, nor am I usually prepared in the garden to put tomatoes and peppers in May. But if we could jump into June. So June, and again, anecdotally, June 1, boom, thermostat turns up, spigot turns off. It gets hot, it gets dry. And you can kind of see how this progression of temperatures will increase on average highs. This last couple of years, our highs have been primarily in the upper 80s to lower 90s. But if you look back here, right past the summer solstice, we had a dip. We had a cold front move through. And on those dates, we got, right here, we got down. And on this one, it reflects to 31 degrees in Durango on June 23rd. And so we froze. That's like a nursery's dream, because then you have to go back and buy the biggest tomato plant to replace the one that would just turn black. But for all of us at Garden, or even those folks who are farming or making a livelihood at it, this was a killer. It did a lot of damage. I bet you I only have a laser pointer from here on out. And here's just some photos up. This is a farm west of here. These are potato plants that just got pretty well nipped. Now they were able to push new growth, but that new growth is now about 2 to 3 weeks behind. 2 to 3 weeks behind in our environment is really risky. The numbers up here in the upper right-hand corner, we have an incubator farm in Hesperus, Colorado. It's about 7,300 feet in elevation. This was their temperature right before sunrise, and it's 27 degrees. We have 6 beginning farmers up there who farm anywhere from 1/8 of an acre up to about 1/2 an acre. If I'm a beginning farmer and come June 22nd, June 23rd, it gets to be 27 degrees, it's going to be a pretty quick reality slap on what farming is like and the challenges that we have with food production. I wish I do not. I turned this pointer off now, so I'm going to leave it. So just don't focus on the red dot. Hopefully you won't have to. So we look at our warm season crops. We have those that none of these can really tolerate a frost. It hits 32 degrees, you're going to see damage. And peppers and tomatoes definitely fall into that. They fall into that very tender vegetable crop. With daytime temperatures, hopefully they're above 60 degrees, because if it gets below 55 as a high, you're going to start stunting that plant. If it gets to 32 degrees, you're going to see some black leaves. So when do we plant these out? For me, it's usually the first or second week of June, and probably with some frost protection. And again, I'm going to get to the late season, but all these things that we can do early season are going to prep us so well for having a successful tomato and pepper crop. And I hope Katie's listening, because as the statewide Master Gardener Coordinator, she needs to start growing some tomatoes in her garden, just to feel everybody's pain, or be reminded of what pain feels like. But so text, a soil is going to dry itself before it forms itself. So we're going to want to try to dry that soil as quickly as we possibly can. We can do that by putting black plastic on the ground. We can do it by raising a bed. If you were to raise your bed 9 inches, you're promoting faster drainage of water. So again, go down to that third bullet, where soil that's wet is going to put almost all of its energy into drying itself. If you can aid and assist that by getting that water to move out of that soil profile a little bit more quickly, then it's going to warm itself that much more quickly. So when you put a transplant in, a transplant that hopefully you've hardened off, but a transplant that's been probably sitting in a nice warm greenhouse or nursery for a couple weeks, you put that into your cold soil, it's not going to be happy with you. It's going to shock. And so we don't want that to shock. We want these plants to get in and feel comfortable and start growing. And again, it also goes to like choosing the best transplants. And I can tell you, bigger isn't always better when it comes to tomatoes. I don't like that huge tomato plant. I don't have as much success with it. So I'm looking at smaller plants. I'm looking at about like 6 to 8 inches in height, maybe a little bit taller if I'm pushing the season a little bit. But I also want to make sure you plant them deeply. And you can do it, Master Gardeners, we tell you to lay the plant over on its side and give it a nice little comfy bed, and then it'll raise up. And that's true, or you can just plant it deeply. So the schematic on the left, this is just planting it deep, and this is laying it horizontally. So what happens here is you'll pull off leaves that are on the stem of the plant that you then bury. Where these leaves were will then turn to roots. They're adventitious rooters. And that's going to give you much more of a rooting area. So, hypothetically, you just originally had this small area for rooting. And then now you would have the area of all of this for rooting. And the same could be said if you plant it deeply. You plant it deeper, and you get all these adventitious roots that come off. Here on the right, with a little bit bigger, you'll see a tomato plant that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sets of leaves. They're removing a number of those leaves, of 3 sets of those leaves. And then this becomes the new soil line. We don't want to plant it so deep that we're kind of restricting oxygen to those roots. But again, if you're in a raised bed situation, that's not going to be as much of an issue. So don't be afraid to plant them deeper. Again, continuing with tomatoes, I'm going to roll through this pretty quickly because I think most of you know this stuff. I'm just not always sure. Determinate and indeterminate tomatoes. Determinants are the bush tomatoes. They tend to grow vertical at first, and then they push out a lot of side shoots, flowers, and fruit. Like crop bearing period is relatively short, maybe a week to 2 weeks, depending on the variety and depending on where you're at. Usually they don't have to be staked unless you have a really big fruit load, and I've been blessed with that a couple times where the whole plant just decides to fall over. They tend to be more compact, and they also tend to have shorter days to harvest, which for us in mountain communities is key. I promote these. I love determinate tomatoes because I can kind of get them all and know that you're going to get a big push of tomatoes. So when they come on, they come on. So you better be ready to sauce, you better be ready to make salsa, or just eat a lot of tomatoes, which in my world is a pretty good deal. Then we also have the indeterminates. Most of our heirloom varieties are these indeterminates. Most of our smaller tomatoes are are indeterminates. They continue to grow vegetatively and reproductively at the same time. So they'll put out leaf matter at the same time they're putting out flowers, at the same time they're trying to get fruit to ripen. And these plants can grow quite tall. 6 feet is not uncommon or taller. There's some that, you stick them in a greenhouse and they're 12-foot tall plants. Most of these you're going to have to cage, you're going to have to support, and you're also going to have to sucker. Suckers are the little leaflets or stems that grow in the crotches or the armpits of the tomato here. And that's where we want to keep on suckering out those. And especially for us in mountain communities, it's going to be key to take those suckers out. Suckers are similar to like water sprouts on trees. They put out a lot of growth, but they don't put out much in the form of reproductive. So in an apple tree, you can get water shoots or suckers on the branches or at the base of the tree, depending on which one it is. It can put out 12 to 18 inches of growth, but no flowers and hence no fruit. So the same as with tomatoes. Try to get to those plants as often as you can to pull those suckers out. And I'm not going to go through varieties and types because there are so many types and varieties of tomatoes out there that I'm sure I'll forget some. These are just some that I've grown and had moderate success with. Sun Gold, which is just the small orange tomato. It's my favorite tomato just because it is a burst of sweetness. Again, this is a smaller, probably quarter-sized or smaller tomato. The challenge with these small tomatoes, the same with the sweet 100s, the same as the yellow pear that you see the photo of here. You have to pick them because they'll split. They keep growing and growing and growing and growing, and then they split. So obviously if you're growing for market, that's not a good thing. But if you're also growing and putting them in, salads or whatever, sometimes those splits can cause some little bit of fungal activity in there. That's where you can get some disease come into the plant. So again, just watch those smaller ones. And I'm sorry that if in the parentheses, I is indeterminate and D is determinate. So remember, D is the bush tomatoes. I tend to be those that vine. So again, I don't know how many of you guys have grown some of these. 4th of July is kind of one of my new favorite ones. Celebrity's been around for a long, long time. The earlies, early girl, early boy. Those are all relatively common varieties that you can find nurseries, box stores, farmers market. Anything with the word Siberian or Arctic, that's kind of my theory. If that word is used in the title, it better be relatively cold hardy. And then also look for days to maturity. So 75 days, again, you're going to push these 75 days from the time you put that in the ground. And we're only putting transplants in the ground in our mountain communities. We're not planting from seed outdoors. So less than 75 days. So again, that lies a challenge. It's tough sometimes to grow plants in that short amount of time. And then we hop back to peppers. I apologize, I had a photo here, it didn't show up. But peppers, a little bit different than tomatoes. I don't mind trying to find bigger pepper transplants. I feel like they do okay to bigger size. But I can also tell you that they're slow to grow and you're going to freak out. And I do it every year. I grow my peppers in containers. I don't grow peppers in ground. So at our house, we grow jalapenos. And I don't have a big garden. My garden's really probably pretty small, but I have a couple jalapeno plants. I have a padron, which if you guys haven't tried padron peppers, they're super tasty. I have a garden salsa variety, which is wicked hot. And then I think I have 6 or 7 shishito peppers plants, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. But I freak out every year that they're not going to grow. They just sit there. Especially in 2019, they did just sit there because it was so cool. I didn't get frosted. I kind of covered my peppers that night and on the solstice. But yeah, they didn't do anything. They were at about 3 to 4 inches for what felt like almost a good month. And so I did not expect to get any fruit. But lo and behold, these past 2 weeks, we've had days in mid-90s and warm nights in the 60s, and my peppers have just gone off. So I think we've had 5 harvests now of shishito peppers, and which is, to me, it's a godsend. But again, you're going to choose these transplants with a good root system. Don't be afraid to take that plant out of the container and look at the roots. You know, we're looking at like maybe 8 to 10 sets of leaves. If they have flowers or fruit, and if you can, pass it up. Go to one that doesn't have flowers or even small fruit on it, because those plants are stressed. At that stage, there's some sort of stress event, maybe coming from a warm greenhouse into our garden centers and nurseries, maybe water stress, cold, heat stress, who knows what it is. Pass those up. And then if your transplants look good, you put them in, they get stressed, so they start putting out some flowers, remove them. You know, a full month of removing those flowers is going to be, you know, is going to pay dividends in the end for sure. And again, so choosing the best variety. So we all love colored peppers. And I can tell you, I don't grow bells. I don't grow bell peppers because you figure the bigger the fruit, the longer the season. And that is roughly true with peppers. I just don't think that for me, I cannot get a full pepper to grow very well. They tend to be small bell peppers. I'm not a huge fan of green bell peppers. It's not, I mean, I'll eat them, but I would much prefer a colored bell, a red, a yellow, or an orange. But the challenge is that if you're going to go from green, which is the immature stage, to a color, which is the mature stage, you're going to have to add about 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks to that, depending on your environment. And I don't have 21 extra days for some of these plants. I just don't. So I tend to grow the smaller ones. This one on the right is kind of like a cherry pepper, pretty hot pepper. The one on the upper right some people call them like a Lunchable, but these aren't actual Lunchables. They're called Corno di Toros, which is a sweet pepper. And they're small, you know, maybe the size of a ring finger, kind of a couple inches long. They do come in, I think, red and orange, or this yellow color that I've seen. But I've grown them twice. I didn't grow them this year because I couldn't find any starts. But they're a good pepper. I like jalapenos. These padrones are the ones in the lower right-hand corner. And my favorites are shishito peppers, which is a Japanese-style pepper. Thin-walled, it's not hot. You know, like maybe 1 out of 20, you get a little bit of heat. But you just sear them and then top them with salt and eat them like they're popcorn. They're my favorite, far and away of any pepper, other than green chilies. But I don't grow green chilies. I let Pueblo, Hatch, Delta area, I like them. I'll let them grow my chili peppers now. Okay, now as we get closer and closer to harvest, you know, this is, for some of us, this is now. For others, this has been a couple weeks ago. But for those small fruited tomatoes and peppers, it's like a lot of our vegetables. The more you pick, the more it flowers. The more it flowers, the more it fruits. So watch those plants closely and keep picking them. You just have to keep picking. So again, if you may miss some, and you may get a really long pepper, you may get a tomato that splits. No different, you may get a zucchini that's the size of your lower leg, or, you know, all of those things. The more you pick, the more that response regenerates within that plant to flower again. And hopefully those flowers, in some case of peppers, are pollinated by bees or whatever, and that process continues. So again, continually pick these, put them in the fridge if they're peppers, and store them, and keep going on with it. Watch your tomatoes right about now, because most are ready about 40 to 60 days after those blossoms open. And that's a typical size slicing tomato, not really the cherry tomatoes. And the one thing I do see, and this is somewhat anecdotally, I used to do bell pepper trials in Florida. We used to grow an acre of bell peppers. And I would notice what the farmers down there would do was that when these pepper plants come up, the first flower and hence the first fruit they form tends to be in the crown. So if you look at my camera and my fancy schematic with my hands, this is a pepper plant, right? Here's the stem, here's the lateral stems and branches. You tend to have right here, you have a fruit that sets right there. Now, if you know anything about, plant physiology or biology or botany, as the water and nutrients travels from the roots up, it's going to hit this, which is called the sink, and that plant, or that fruit is going to get the majority of the carbohydrates and even the water. So what I do is that becomes a sacrificial lamb. That fruit, even if this is, my jalapenos did it this year. And I removed that first jalapeno when it was maybe 3/4 of an inch. And all of a sudden, it sure seemed like the rest of the plant just pushed out a ton of flowers and then a ton of fruit. So again, I removed that. And definitely if you're going to do bell peppers, I would remove that fruit. Again, another challenge lies with bell peppers is that they're not going to fruit as much as a jalapeno or the smaller fruiting varieties do. So it's always a tough blow when you have to take one of the very few fruit that you're going to grow. And then tomato plant, and we say now, and I'm going to say ish. It's my favorite word is ish. Because for me at 65 is going to be different than, I guarantee you, somebody up in Steamboat or somebody in Summit or Eagle counties, Telluride, Norwood, even folks just, east of here, Bayfield, above Bayfield, we're all going to be different. But right about now, if you have the indeterminate varieties, and it's kind of this pixelated schematic here on the right is an indeterminate. So I want this to be taken off. This is the growing tip, 6 inches, the terminal growth. I want you to take your pruners, your scissors, and clip that off. And you're going to have to keep doing it because that plant's going to want to outsmart you and create a new terminal growth component. So I clip this off. There's a good chance that this is going to start to grow and be the terminal growth. Keep pulling it off. Keep cutting it. You want all your resources to go to your fruits or your flowers, not to vegetative. So again, you're going to continually we call it topping. So I'm topping my tomatoes. And I'm topping my tomatoes probably about every 5 to 7 days right now. And it's going to happen until that first freeze. I'm going to continue to top them. But I'm also going to say, all right, I have a couple of bigger tomatoes. With those bigger tomatoes, if they put out a blossom now, gone. It's probably not going to be able to put on a fruit in the next 4 to 6 weeks. That's going to get ripe. And they continue to sucker. Again, these suckers have got to come out because you want your energy, the carbohydrates, to go to the flower clusters, to the fruit. That's where you want it to go, not to vegetative growth. Make sense? And here's my tomatoes from years ago, which my son, I think, still remembers. This is his blanket. One of these is blankets. This is his blanket. I took it from his bed. That time, I think he was 4. Now he's 13. He's still bitter. But I would grab every towel, and we've all done this at freeze. You grab your towels, your blankets, you cover your plants. You do a dance. You pray to whoever you're going to pray to and hope that your plants can make it through. But what you got to think about is I get doing that at the frost, but it's not really a bad idea to start that now because of this ethylene. So again, ethylene is the ripening hormone in plants. It's what's kind of on the vine, what fruit will do to go from one stage to the next to the ripening stage. And I'll show you a graph of that here in a second. But when temperatures go below 50 at night, not 32, don't think freezing, below 50, that ethylene production drops and it slows down or it stops. You get like 5 or 6 of these nights in a row, it's tough to get ethylene production to ramp back up. So again, it is not uncommon for many of us who grow tomatoes to have that one tomato that just seems to stay green or a little bit colored, but it's not going to ripen. And most of the time, this is because our temperatures And again, for late August into September, that's not uncommon for temperatures to get below 50. It's not at all. And again, but we don't want that. So we want to trap that heat. It's key that as soon as that sun comes out and temperatures get above 50, 60 pretty quickly, we take all that stuff off, so we don't create this super hot little greenhouse and really stress our plants. But again, know that we're not getting much ethylene production below 50. And the other piece of this that's not on the slide is that when temperatures get above 85, and I'm sure some of you wish you can get above 85, but we got above 85 consistently. The like lycopene in tomatoes, the carotenoids, they also slow down. So that's also another ripening component to our fruit. So if it gets too hot, ripening slows down. If it gets too cold, ripening slows down. Again, Colorado and tomatoes can be a challenge. We don't see this as much with peppers. Peppers will ripen on the vine, but again, ethylene is still at 50, but they can take, the plants can take the heat a little bit more during the heat of the day. So look at the stages. And again, this is a stage that the USDA uses for grading, but as gardeners, we can also use this stage. And there's a stage here, it's called the breaker stage. It's the stage I want you to kind of focus on. This is called the blossom end. On that blossom end, you start to get color. So roughly 10% or less of the fruit starts to turn color. This is a key stage for us right here, and I'll tell you why in a couple minutes. But we go from everything from green to red, or color, whatever your color is. But red, this would be called red ripe at this point. But we can harvest anywhere from this breaker stage down to the red stage if we had to. So again, follow me along with this, with this graph here, but know that, only red equates these intrinsic qualities of the tomato: color, aroma, flavor, sugar. Those two are always going to be combined, phenolics and pectins. And then the green is going to be the other thing: color, acidity, starch, firmness. So obviously the green are going to be higher early on, and red will be higher later on. Yeah, very evident. But also look at this line right here. This is ethylene production, okay? The ripening hormone. So we get down here at the very beginning at NG, which is mostly green. You're not going to get hardly any ethylene production. So it is really hard to get this tomato here to a ripening stage. But then once we start to get to this breaker stage, right in through here, the ethylene production really ramps up. So ethylene is just produced at a really high rate, continues to go. And obviously, as that fruit continues to turn color, ethylene production keeps climbing, until we get to kind of that red stage, and then ethylene production just levels off, and then we'll start to decline. So again, here, with the green, you're not going to have much of that ripening hormone, and then it continues to ramp up as this, what we call a climacteric fruit. There's a number of these that mostly are all fruit. Bananas, apples, avocados, these are all fruit that will continue to ripen either off or on the plant. Peppers aren't that way. They will ripen on the plant, but not off the plant. So the end is near, right? This is, for some of you, this may be sooner than you wish. But we may start getting freezes here across the state in the next couple weeks. I think it snowed on Monarch Pass, last week. It snowed on us over up on top of Molas Pass about 3 weeks ago. So you can, Colorado. But once it reaches this breaker stage, which this is a little bit beyond that breaker stage, it has an ability to ripen on or off the plant. So we can either harvest those fruit and bring them inside, or there's other folks who will take that whole plant. I personally have never done this, where you harvest the plant, roots and all, bring it inside, take it someplace that's relatively warm, probably pretty dry, darkness doesn't really matter, and you hang that plant upside down. The hope is that there's enough reserves in that plant that it'll still go ahead and put energy into the fruit. But once you pull it, it's also a signal to that plant to increase ethylene production. So you pull the plant, you hang it upside down, put a mattress under there because these tomatoes may drop, and occasionally check on the plants. But if you don't want to pull the pulled plants, look for pulling, any of the fruit that's at this breaker stage or beyond. What do you do with it? You put it in boxes, roughly, or bags. And, you kind of want to, again, you're going to layer these. Tomatoes are fragile. The greener they are, the harder they are. But you're going to layer these in a box. That's what I've always done. And then you separate them by newspaper. I do probably 2, maybe 3 layers in a box, depending on how much weight's going to be pressing down, how big the tomatoes are. And within each one of those layers, we're going to place one of these fruit or a tomato that produces ethylene, a lot of ethylene. Again, tomatoes produce a lot of ethylene. Apples produce a lot of ethylene. Bananas also produce a lot of ethylene, which is why they go from yellow to brown in what seems like overnight in your pantry at your house. So you're going to place one of those between each layer, put the top on, place it somewhere warm and dry. Again, it doesn't have to, light is not a factor in this. Heat is a factor in this. So just, again, I place them in the corner of the upstairs room, and I check them every week. And then you're going to pull out those fruit that are mostly red. And then I continue that process. Some of them won't turn. It just doesn't happen. So again, if you look at it, you can wrap them individually. It's a lot of work. I'm too lazy to do that. I just tend to cover them with a piece of paper and then some tomatoes on each layer. You can place them in a brown paper bag. You can do this with cherries, close it up, do the same thing, stick it somewhere in the house. Don't forget about it. And then check back in and pull out the fruit. You may have to have some of these sacrificial lambs where you put something in there that maybe will go too far and it'll get rotten. But again, that's continually producing ethylene, which is a good thing. And then once we harvest, right, we'll eventually harvest our tomatoes, woohoo. Handle them gently, wash them with a cloth if you have to. Storing tomatoes, and the same with peppers. Peppers not as much as tomatoes, but in an ideal world, we are storing our tomatoes outside of the refrigerator. Peppers, I'm okay storing those inside the refrigerator just because they don't produce that ethylene. They may rot if I leave them on the counter. So I'm just going to go ahead and place those in the fridge. So again, if you want to have your tomatoes on the counter, that's fine. 61 to 86 will be the fast ripening period. If you want to slow that down, that ripening period, find someplace that's maybe subterranean, your basement, an unheated garage, a cool room somewhere, a shed, those things that maybe don't get as warm. So again, especially if you're growing determinate tomatoes that are producing all these fruit all at once, trying to slow that ripening process down, find someplace to store them that it's not so warm. Again, peppers, you can store them in the fridge, and peppers will last, depending on how you store them, 2 to 3 weeks, no problem in the fridge. We just say don't store tomatoes in the fridge because that cold breaks down the cellular structure and it kind of decreases flavor. Again, that said, I've got 2 tomatoes in my fridge right now because if I leave them on the counter, I'm going to have fruit flies up the wazoo, and then it's going to drive the wife and kids crazy, and I'm going to sleep on the couch. So I don't want to sleep on the couch, so I'm putting my tomatoes in the fridge. If you harvest them green, we've all done it. There's a slight chance they may ripen. I know some of you said I've ripened red tomato or green tomatoes, and they're great. That's awesome. Almost it's pretty rare. Typically those green fruit will rot before they ripen. So yeah, then you just Google green tomato recipes. I get pretty sick and tired of fried green tomatoes or green tomato chutney, mincemeat, all those wonderful things to use green tomatoes. But And I'm telling you, if you're growing tomatoes in a mountain community, there's a very good chance you will learn to be proficient with green tomatoes in the kitchen. And the last slide here is just, do I cover, or is it too late to cover the plants? I talked about covering plants when it's 50 degrees or less at night. Great. Try to do that. But I also know how much of a pain in the rear it is to cover your plants. So putting frost cloth over tomato cages and tomato vines that are kind of sticking out of the cages and they're all gangly. Like, I cannot imagine putting frost cloth over my tomatoes right now. And I don't have like 5 or 6 of them in my home garden, and it would just be such a pain in the rear to do that. So I'm just going to risk it. Unfortunately, if I was smart and had a nice kind of pruning or trellising technique with them this year, maybe I could cover them. But again, don't forget there's the challenge with ethylene and temp. So even if we're covering them to survive at 32-degree temperature potential, that ethylene is going to be at nil. It's not going to produce. So even if we protect them one night or 2 nights or 3 nights, we may have temperatures consistently below 50 at night from then to the rest of the season, into the season. So it may not be worth it. For other crops, I am all about covering for the first frost, if you can, if it's feasible, because I don't know what it's like in other places, but it is not uncommon for us to have a cold front move through. Clear nights, we have 1 to 2 nights where temperatures are somewhere between 30 and 32. And then it gets warm again for a couple weeks. We kind of have that quote unquote Indian summer. So if we can get that for a couple weeks, and all I have to do is protect it for 2 nights, and I think it's worth it. I do it with green beans all the time. Beans are super susceptible to frost. Come middle into September, when we get a potential frost, I'm covering those plants, uncovering them in the morning. Again, if I can get a couple of days of protection, I typically will get a whole nother flush of fruit that's going to go out. So, okay. I blew through that pretty quickly, which is not uncommon for me to do, is to try to push a bunch of slides in a small amount of time. But we do have like 5 minutes, and I want to save time for any input from the attendees or questions. And then also maybe a couple minutes to do that evaluation. For us with the Master Gardener program, this lunch and learn kind of hour-long presentations is somewhat new. We don't do this a lot, but it's a way for us to try to get some continuing education for all of you. And if you don't give us those evaluations back, then we don't know if this is going to be worthwhile. So again, Katie, I'm guessing it takes a couple minutes to do this evaluation. Just circle 5 on everything. You'll be great.
Absolutely. Yes. And the link is up there in the chat box, so you can click on that or copy and paste it and take that evaluation. It's a couple minutes, if that. Depends on how much you want to say or suggestions you have for future talks. So there was a question that came in, and I'm going to encourage people to continue to ask some questions since we have a few more minutes. You also have the option now to unmute yourself. And so if you wanted to just say a question, that's easier than typing, then know that you can do that as well. There was a question that came in during one of your talks, and it's long, so let me kind of get to the heart of it here. The question has to do with the breaker stage and whether or not certain fruits and vegetables will continue to ripen. So what permits some fruit to continue to ripen after being harvested while others do not? Do all fruits have a breaker stage? And then is it correct that vegetables never ripen after picking?
Yeah, no, you're kind of, that is roughly correct. It depends on if you want to classify tomatoes as a vegetable or a fruit. Agronomically, they're a vegetable. Botanically, they're a fruit. So tomatoes are really only the climacteric fruit that will continue to ripen after harvest. I was looking at a list yesterday, and I honestly think that everything else is a fruit. It's like a tree fruit. It's not going to be something that we grow in our quote-unquote vegetable garden. So I think tomatoes are the only one. I can I could probably double check here real quick and see I had that list somewhere, but everything else is going to be a fruit from a tree. So definitely apples. I know, like, I used to grow mangoes when I lived in Florida. They would continue to ripen after, which is, if you think about as you walk around a grocery store, think about what you would potentially purchase at a relatively immature state, right? So I'm not going to get a tomato that I can squish in my hands. It's really hard to find a tomato like that in a grocery store. They're all hard as rocks. I'm not going to get a brown banana. I'm not going to get a really mushy cantaloupe. Those kinds of, and I guess maybe melons, I think, are climacteric. They're agronomically, they're a vegetable, botanically, they're a fruit. So again, that's the challenge. They call it the breaker stage is what we'll call it on tomatoes, but we also see that on peppers. So you can see a pepper enter a breaker stage, which is essentially going from an immature to a mature fruit. If you go out and look, and it goes pretty quick, it depends on how big the fruit is. Again, I have little shishito peppers on my plant that are red and shriveled up. And that just kind of happened, I felt like, in a couple of days. You could look at a jalapeno plant of fruit, get a larger jalapeno fruit, and that bottom end or that blossom end will start to go darker on you. And it'll go from a dark stage to a red stage. So the red stage will be that mature stage for a jalapeno. So again, those are the two that I can, on top of my head, will go from these different stages of color while on the plant.
Great, thank you. How about this twist to the veggie question related to root vegetables, specifically sweet potatoes? Should they be cured at temps above 90 degrees after pulling them out of the ground? And I've heard this for onions as well. Maybe not 90, but.
If you can do it above, did you say sweet potatoes or potatoes?
Sweet potatoes.
Wait, are you growing sweet potatoes?
No, this is a question that came in. If I'm not growing tomatoes, do you think I'm growing sweet potatoes?
I've never grown sweet potatoes here because they're a subtropical plant.
Right.
I've seen them have success in grow domes or in like hoop houses, but I've never seen them be successful outdoors. That said, man, I love being proven wrong. That's awesome. 90 degrees to me feels high. Onions, onions, to cure onions, it needs to be warm, but to cure an onion or garlic, it's more critical to have it be dry and have some air movement. That's what you want. You don't want stagnation, and you don't want it really cold. I mean, and really that's like maybe 70 degrees, 80 degrees is fine. I'm not going to answer the sweet potato question because I would absolutely be talking out of a different part of my body. So I do not want to even try that one.
Yes, someone had a challenge for you, I guess.
Challenge.
All right, any other questions? I don't see any at this point. Anyone have a question on the line that they want to pipe in? We're getting some thanks. Oh, what's your favorite tomato?
A ripe one.
A ripe one.
One that I grow. I like sun golds. If I can do a black or a purple zebra, I'll try it. But again, like, I also don't like to fail. That's part of my nature. I'm not a big fan of failing, so I'm going to try to grow tomatoes that I know that I can get. But again, if I'm going to go to the farmer's market and someone's growing a big fat brandy wine, I am all over it. I tend to, anything that I can find in a grocery store, I will stay away from. That's my least favorite.
How about this question from Denise? Can tomatoes in greenhouses get too hot?
Yep. And the other part of this too is when we're flowering, when tomatoes are flowering, and we get this questions extension all the time. I got this grow dome. I have a little hobby greenhouse, my hoop house, whatever it is. The plant's doing great. It's growing a ton, but it's not putting out any fruit, which is not uncommon. And that challenge that we have is that when temperatures get above 90, 95 degrees, the tomato plant or even a pepper plant will abort its flowers. It's a defense response for that plant. Too hot, abort the flower, which means I drop it. It's done. So again, if you're growing indoors, May, June, if that's kind of when your tomatoes are starting to put flowers on, you have to have ventilation. You have to be able to cool that thing down. Shade cloth will help a ton. Um, shade cloth is really easy to put on. It's relatively cheap. Don't worry. The plant will still get plenty of sunlight, but try to get those temperatures below 95 degrees, or else that flower will go ahead and drop. And again, also know that they're self-pollinating. Peppers need pollinators. So that's how you need to know that too. If you're trying to grow peppers in a greenhouse, you have to get some pollinators, or you're the pollinator.
Excellent. How do you know when a tomato is about to split, such as a brandy wine?
You drop it on the ground and it breaks really easily, then it's about to split. No, I don't know. I mean, our heirloom varieties tend to have a more propensity for cat facing and splits, and like, defects on the surface. The tomato is splitting because it's growing faster than it can. So it's like us, like my teenage boy, I feel like this is where he's at right now, where he just put on like 7 inches in less than like 8 months. His skin's about ready to split. So again, you have to try to slow that growth down as much as you can towards the end of the season, or just let those fruit ripen indoors on the counter where it's going to be a little bit slower.
Mm-hmm. Great ideas. I don't see anything else. So with that, I think we can close out. And Darrin, I'm at 6,400 feet. So a lot of this really is applicable
Yes.
to my own growing situation on the Front Range. And I think you've
Grow
given
in containers.
me, you've given me some great suggestions and ideas for ways that I might be able to tackle a tomato plant next year. So we'll see. We'll see.
We'll hold your hand.
Excellent. I have a few friends who can help across the state.
Right.
Thank you so much, everybody. We will get this recorded and posted. I will send that out to coordinators along with the evaluation. And if you're not part of CSU or the Master Gardener community and you might miss that email, go ahead and email me and I will send you a direct link. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Darrin. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of your season. Good luck.
Yeah, you too.